Well, good afternoon and welcome to Round the Table with Christian Concern. It's great to have you join us, whether you're on Facebook or on YouTube. And we're going to have a really interesting discussion today. I'm looking forward to it. The government has abandoned radical transgender plans. Is this a turning point? So it's been a big week on transgenderism. Three, at least, new, quite big, important announcements on the subject. With me here today, I've got Dr. Carys Moseley, policy researcher with Christian Concern, and special guest, Dr. Julie Maxwell, who is a community paediatrician with the NHS and an expert in this subject. Great, thank you. Great to see you guys. Women, perhaps I should say. Got to get the genders right these days, you know, haven't I? Thank you so much for coming on, Julie. It's great to see you. And the first big announcement to talk about is the government did a consultation on the Gender Recognition Act, was that 2 years ago or something? It was quite a while ago now, and they finally put out their response this week to that. And the big thing is that they will not allow self-identification of gender, which is what people were expecting would happen, I think. So, Julie, tell us, what's your reaction to this news this week?
Yeah, well, I'm really pleased with this decision. There were a number of issues that really worried me and lots of other medics around the idea of being able to self-identify, because firstly, if you can self-identify, then that takes any kind of medical practitioners out of the equation, which means that despite the fact that actually people who want to transition actually will need medical and surgical treatment if they wanted to do that. So it does need a medical diagnosis. And many of them also have mental health problems, which also need medical issues. But also there's the issue of protection for women as well, because if people can just self-identify and either as a woman or as a man, then that brings all sorts of worrying potential issues around being able to access single-sex spaces, which at the moment obviously are a protection, particularly for women who are more vulnerable. And so, you know, it's would be a real worry if men could effectively just say, I'm a woman today, and then go into their spaces, particularly for vulnerable women who've perhaps been abused in the past and things like that. So, yeah.
So it's a big win, really, for the whole sort of Christian lobby on the one hand, but also the women's lobby on the other hand. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, then do put your questions in because on this subject, because we've got the experts in the room with us here, and it'd be great to pose questions to them. But Carys, what do you think's been happening behind the scenes here? About it took them 2 years to come to this position. And now this is what they've done, and clearly the groups like Mermaids and Stonewall and so on are very upset about it.
That's a good question. What's been happening behind the scenes? Well, first of all, let's look at what we do know. In October 2018, there was a deadline for the consultation was coming up in a few days. Around 50,000, just over 50,000 responses had been sent in. Now, that's already a huge number for a government consultation, probably only equaled by the same-sex marriage consultation. And it showed a massive, widespread public concern, and certainly lots of the women's groups had been going to speak with ministers. But then at the last minute, the Government Equalities Office that was looking after the consultation extended the deadline by about a week. And that, I mean, they didn't need to do that. I'm very suspicious, because what then happened was a deluge of more than 50,000 more responses. And a lot of
50,000 more. Wow. So they doubled. I mean, the number of responses doubled in that extra week.
Almost overnight. Yeah. And
right.
That is very suspicious. And then I think that it turns out the government admitted that some of that came from transgender lobby groups. We're thinking, well, it was so important for them at the time. Why hadn't they taken the normal time in the consultation? There's plenty of time to respond. There's something else going on here, I suspect. Now, what we do know is that 40,000 responses of the total, which is 108,000, came from Stonewall. Stonewall
40,000, wow, that's a huge number.
Around 3 years ago. And so that's interesting. And when you look at the information, there's a huge report that the government has published. It farmed it out to Nottingham Trent University, and they did the analysis of all the responses, right? And you can find out who responded, the demographics.
So this is just so everyone understands. This is an analysis of the responses to the consultation. Yeah,
that's right.
And we put out a we responded as Christian Concern, didn't we, to that consultation? I'm sure Julie responded as well. And we also put out some guidance for people, supporters, if they wanted to respond as well, didn't we?
We did.
Then what the government published is a huge, it was 184 pages, isn't it, from memory?
That's right.
Analysis of that consultation. So tell us about that, Carys.
Well, yes, I mean, that gives us a little bit of a glimpse of what you were asking me earlier about what could have been going on behind the scenes, which is you can tell from the analysis they did how many people actually said they were transgender people responding, because obviously it was aimed partly at them, but also just to the general public.
Yeah.
It's a few thousand, I would say possibly 10 to 20,000. I'd have to check now, it's not in front of my eyes here. But the first two questions were aimed at people who were identified as transgender. The first one was, have you ever applied for a gender recognition certificate?
Yeah.
And the vast majority of people writing from the Stonewall form had not. Now that begs the question: are they all people who self-identify as transgender, or are they just allies writing in? And because most of the responses, many of whom, as we know, were received last minute, were in favour of self-identification. But if those were not actually people who identify as transgender, then what's in it for them? Because we know from many years now of consulting and public debate on all different sectors of society are affected, that it would have a deleterious effect on all kinds of sectors of education, prisons, healthcare, schools, and so on. So there are lots of questions. I still think I don't believe we needed 184 pages of just doing exactly what was done in that analysis. I think there needs to be a lot more questions asked about how the government went about it and what they're planning to do with all this information now.
Yeah. So, Julie, what's your take on that? And also, I'm wondering, sort of, why do you think that all these people who aren't transgender are actually lobbying or were lobbying for self-identification of gender?
I think it's a very interesting question, isn't it? And I know that there are a lot of transgender people who don't want self-identification, and so it does.
Because they feel like it undermines the process they've gone through, don't they? To transition, some of them do. Yes, yeah,
absolutely. And I think there are some people who want to do it because they think it's the right thing to do. It's the sort of woke thing, I suppose, is the
trendy thing. Yeah,
the trendy thing. And I think people are being sort of told that we need to kind of feel sorry for people, and I honestly don't know. I think I find it quite hard to understand why people think that it would be okay. It's a really big thing to identify as the opposite sex. It's a massive thing, and it involves so much. It involves their families, it involves all sorts of things, and to be able to just self-identify is really worrying, and I say it has all sorts of implications for healthcare, for refugees, for women who've been victims of domestic violence, children, massive, and to be able to just do it just like that.
So, and do you think that you're a healthcare professional, do you think that the healthcare professional world will be pleased and relieved about this decision, or are they mixed about it, or neutral, or what do you think?
I think like in everything, there are some people who will be disappointed by this, but I think certainly the majority of medical professionals that I speak to were very worried about it. Issues of hospital wards, medical treatment, because obviously treatment is different whether you're biological male or female. There are, but I think a lot of medical professionals are afraid to speak out. They're afraid to say what their views are, and afraid of the repercussions of doing it.
Yeah. And do you think that there's been quite a lot of fuss, particularly about prisons, hasn't there, in the media about this, because there've actually been sex offenders who've then said, "I'm actually female," or trans. Presumably they've had to go through the process of transition as is, and then gone on to offend in prison or abuse or assault people in prison. Do you think that's been a key sort of point in this for the government?
Yes, I mean, I think that is because that's something that's hit the media. It's something that's, a real an issue, potential issue, isn't it? And I think, there's been enough high-profile cases of it happening to cause a problem. And of course, also that kind of brings into disrepute as well those transgender people who just want to live their lives quietly, actually, as the opposite sex. And actually, a lot of this stuff then brings that into disrepute. And it is and it's interesting that I don't think there are far fewer female to males who would want to be in a male prison or on a male hospital ward or whatever than the other way around, which is interesting.
Yeah. And I'm just noticing a comment here from somebody called Amy on Facebook, who says that she was going through a sex change before she got saved and really believed that it was so important to do that. I don't know if my colleagues can put this up on the screen.
Yeah, it's
amazing. But caused him an awful time mentally. My body wasn't the problem. When I accepted God, it was absolutely supernaturally opened my eyes. My mindset literally changed overnight, and so on. And thank you, Amy, for sharing that story. And of course, this is the untold story, isn't it? Carys, go on. Yeah.
I was going to say that the reason I got involved with the policy issues 4 years ago, as you could start seeing through Maria Miller's private members bill that there was going to be a push towards a gender identity law, like was happening in North America and so on. And it was obvious that what was going to happen was work to help people like Amy was going to become illegal and go underground. And already, I think it's true, isn't it, Julie? The situation is quite bad for doctors, therapists, and so on. We actually have a so-called conversion therapy ban on professional work. And that's made it hard for especially girls and women, because there are now more girls than boys asking to change sex or gender. And there's no training, there's no adequate training available for the medical and mental health professionals. And this leaves vulnerable people like this in a terrible limbo. And so we're not out of the woods. There's still a lot to do, I think, across society with developing the sort of therapy and pastoral care to a rigorous standards, with high standards of safeguarding and training.
And just talk about the whole detransition thing, though, because that's a whole another aspect of this that doesn't often get talked about. And Amy looks like, I don't know how far she went down the actual transition route, but we've had other stories like this, haven't we, of detransitioners, and it seems to be an increasing thing. And these people then say, why on earth? Why did nobody tell me this is a crazy idea? Tell me about that, Julie.
Yeah, so there is an increasing number, particularly of young women, biological women, that have gone various amounts down the transition kind of pathway, and then realize that they've made a complete mistake and that they really do want to be a girl, that they're happy being a girl, or they still aren't too sure about it, but actually they realize that transitioning hasn't helped their mental health problems. And I think what is becoming increasingly clear is that as soon as whether it's a child or a young person, because the adolescence continues to up to 25, that actually they're whenever they seek help, as soon as they mention gender identity issues, that is what is focused on. And then nobody is looking at any other mental health problems, any of the issues that might have led to these kind of feelings they might have, that some of them might have been abused, some of them might have had difficult family relationships, some of them might have anorexia or other body dysmorphic type problems, but all of those are being ignored because people are afraid to address those issues and suggest that maybe gender might not be the problem because they might be accused of conversion therapy. And so clinicians are increasingly afraid to even kind of, address any of those issues, or to even talk about it. If somebody says, I think I'm a man or I think I'm a woman, they just accept it and kind of make the referral, and that's increasingly the case.
Wow. And Carys, because I think you said it was only Christian groups that actually raised the subject of detransitioners in the consultation. Is that right?
Well, okay. So this report only mentions us, actually, Christian Concern and the Evangelical Alliance, as having discussed regret and detransition and the importance of having adequate medical pathways, and of course there aren't at the moment for those people, and there haven't been, by the way, since Charing Cross Gender Clinic opened in the late 1960s. So this is a long-standing problem, really, and I would say it's a parallel with abortion clinics and the lack of post-abortion counselling on the NHS, but that's a different story. So yes, we were mentioned. We don't know. It's perfectly possible that individuals wrote in. We're pretty sure that people who are detransitioning individuals would have also been writing in, as they would have in Scotland, but they don't really seem to have a lobby group present. It's quite difficult for them to find each other, I gather.
Yeah. So all of this links into the second big announcement I wanted to discuss today, which is that the government announced an independent inquiry into these gender clinics. And they appointed someone to review what's going on. And obviously, there's been a whole load of controversial stuff and news about that. Julie, can you tell us about sort of the backdrop to this?
Yeah, so I mean, there has been an increasing uncomfortableness, I suppose, that's not really a word, but an increasing concern around what's been going on in the gender clinic. The Tavistock is the NHS clinic in the UK, and there's been a massive increase in referrals.
Oh, have we lost Julie for a minute there? Carys, do you want to carry on? I think we lost you a minute there, Julie. You want to carry on? Massive increase in referrals, you were saying?
Yeah, so massive increase in referrals to the gender identity clinic, and a significant number of the referrals that get made there end up being on medical treatment, and then obviously potentially going on to surgical treatment later. And there have been sort of increasing numbers of people, myself included, who have been raising concerns about the potential side effects of the medical treatment, and also the lack of knowledge of the long-term effects of them, and in particular the fact that hormone blockers were initially introduced in the idea that they would pause puberty to enable a child to explore psychological issues before deciding whether they wanted to then go on to transition. But in fact, almost every single child that goes on to puberty blockers goes on to cross-sex hormones, and so it clearly fixes them in that idea. And so there's been quite a lot of controversy with people resigning from the Tavistock because they weren't happy about what was happening there. So the news that this independent review, which is being undertaken by Hilary Cass, who is a previous president of the Royal College of Paediatrics, this is really, really good news that this whole area is going to be put under scrutiny, going to be looking at outcomes, all of the issues, and looking at how to go forward with treating these children, because these children are children with problems, children who are vulnerable, and they need really good treatment. They need the best treatment that's going to have the best outcomes. And it looks at the moment like what they're getting is not that at all.
And I saw that the review includes reviewing the whole question about puberty blockers, which is very controversial, because of potential long-term side effects, and so on. Can you talk about that a bit as well? And also, I'm wondering, Julie, what your recommendation would be if you were reviewing this? What would you say?
So as far as the puberty blockers goes, I mean, those drugs were introduced, and they are drugs that are used, but they are normally used for a child that goes through puberty at a very young age. So a child who started going through puberty at the age of maybe 5 or 6, because if a child goes through puberty, then they stop growing. It has effects on their bones and and all sorts of things.
Right.
So for those children, then if they then come off the puberty blockers, they then go through puberty at a normal age when they're supposed to. but if you give those puberty blockers to a child who should be going through normal puberty, you are stopping normal puberty. And normal puberty involves growth, it involves body changes, but it also involves lots of emotional and brain changes as well. So when you give puberty blockers, you stop all of that. And obviously, theoretically, you could then stop them and then they would go through puberty. But then that wouldn't be normal puberty because it would be at an abnormal age. You would have stopped all that brain maturation. But also what we know is that those children, once they go on puberty blockers, they don't stop taking them. They go on to cross-sex hormones. Hardly any will stop that. So it sort of sets them in that trajectory.
And to what extent is it the case, Julie, that children who are questioning their gender and want to change, if they're given no treatment, they end up changing their minds and deciding when puberty comes? I mean, puberty in some ways sort of helps them realize you're fighting against nature, doesn't it? Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So in studies that had been done prior to this kind of treatment, there is sort of a variation, but around about 80% of children who express feelings of gender dysphoria in childhood will go on to be completely happy with their biological sex later
80%,
on.
wow.
It's around. Studies vary from kind of, some of them are sort of 70%, some of them up to over 90%.
Right.
So that's, that's the kind of normal trajectory. Because I mean, puberty is a time when, children are discovering who they are. Their bodies are changing, which is a scary thing. It's not surprising that particularly girls don't want those body changes, particularly in our sexualized society. So it's no wonder they, don't particularly want to go through puberty. It's a time when that you are discovering who you are, and the process of puberty helps you to do that. And also, obviously, puberty is when your body is becoming fertile as well. So, for boys, that's when you start to produce sperm. For girls, that's when your eggs begin to start maturing. So if you stop puberty, you stop boys producing sperm and you stop eggs maturing in girls. So that, that obviously is a massive issue for the future. And of course, as soon as you go into cross-sex hormones.
I think somebody's asked a question about, does it affect fertility? So
yeah. So long term, that you will become infertile because you're not going to be producing sperm or releasing eggs.
Right. Wow. So what would your recommendation be for, when children turn up to one of these clinics because they've got problems, like you say? What do you think the sort of treatment pathways should be, or I don't know what the right word is?
So I mean, the first thing, as a doctor, the first thing you always do in any situation is take a full history and find out exactly, what's going on. You always, even when you're looking at very physical conditions, you still want to know about family history, social history, all of that, because obviously those impact on everything. So you want to find out, everything that's going on in a child's life. And the child then needs to be given an opportunity to explore any issues that they might have. And even then, a child who's still, having gone through puberty, might still be struggling with their gender. Surely it's better to help them to find ways to live with that than to be doing drastic medical and surgical changes, because that child, if they go on to transition, is going to be on medicine for the rest of their life. They're going to be on massive doses of hormones for the rest of their life and have surgery that is only going to ever approximate to the opposite sex. They can never become the opposite sex. So it's always got to be better to try and help them live with what's physical reality, rather than trying to change their body to match their mind.
Yeah. And of course, this is what detransitioners say, isn't it? Why did any doctor think it was right to abuse my body in this way? And now I've got to live with it for the rest of my life, kind of thing, be really interesting to see where that goes, that independent review. How long do you think it will take? Any ideas? Is there a timescale on it? I'm not sure there is.
I think they've said next year.
Right.
I think it's quite a short time frame. I don't think it's yeah. So I mean, I think
presumably she will talk to people who've resigned from Tavistock and all the disaffected staff and all that kind of thing as well in the mix of that. I presume it'll be negligent not to. I imagine.
Yeah, my understanding is that there is a group with people from all sorts of viewpoints, and they're all meeting to to discuss and look at all the evidence together. Right.
Yeah, good. So, and then the third big announcement. What a week it's been, hey, on this subject. Is there's been new guidelines published by the government on RSE, relationships and sex education, and there was this extraordinary paragraph in there which said that you shouldn't assume because somebody doesn't conform to gender norms, gender stereotyping, you shouldn't suggest that they've got the wrong gender or the wrong body, and furthermore, you shouldn't use materials that suggest they've got the wrong gender or the wrong body, or organizations that suggest that as well. Now, and we know that this has been going on in schools. I mean, Carys, tell us a bit about that.
Well, yes, that's very interesting. I mean, the Parent Power is an organisation that tries to help parents be aware of this very indoctrination, and they've got recently published a map showing where there was Stonewall material in schools. And of course, there was parents themselves who were going, asking local authorities, perhaps making freedom of information requests, perhaps asking their children. And the map, a few places in Wales, Northern Ireland, all over England. And so this announcement is about England, but I'm hoping it will be will be copied elsewhere as well. And of course, we've had some, parents coming to us for help with stuff, even in primary schools. I think this indoctrination needs to be kicked out of schools. It is no use being subtle about this. It is damaging to children. Children are confused and hurt. We've had a case involving a child who spoke up and who said that other children in her class were sighing and were confused, coming home saying, should I really be a girl or a boy? That's the bottom line. No, they shouldn't be coming home saying that. They shouldn't be having nightmares about this. You need real adults in the room, so to speak, to handle
and this is what the whole No Outsiders thing that kicked off, was it last year? With Muslims in particular very upset, and they were saying we've had children come back saying, might I be a girl tomorrow or something.
Yeah.
Does this mean No Outsiders is banned? Do you think that's what it means? No Outsiders is banned, Julie?
I'm not sure about No Outsiders, because the thing is that's also about same-sex parenting in different types of family, whereas this is about transgenderism and the idea of being born in the wrong body. So it could mean it could mean that groups like Mermaids are banned, and it depends on Stonewall material, because they produce so much they can always say, we won't take XYZ into school, but they'll take something else. I think we've got to watch out, though, that groups can go underground. And what they might try to do is go under LGB rather than LGBT. Whereas, in fact, that also can involve problems with your body and being unhappy and has similar roots, to be quite honest, a lot of the time. And you listen to people's stories, you look at the literature. So you have to be really careful. The other thing I think that's important to watch out for, in case people get too complacent, is I think there's a bit of a postcode lottery for effectively safeguarding children. Whereas some local authorities are fine, others will have keenly adopted this material. And there's a sort of group within the local authority who keep on pushing it. Yeah. And so we need to be very vigilant, because that's an announcement in guidelines. And people will always try and find ways around. So, yeah, I just think this week, because it's been good news, we shouldn't just sit back. I mean, I live in Wales, and government here has said, trans women and women, we believe this. It's complete rubbish. And yet we've got a new education curriculum supposed to be coming out. We've also got elections next year, and I'm hoping this will, we know that this will come up from parents, which is why I said to you earlier, this announcement in England is great. It needs to be emulated by the civil servants elsewhere as well.
And Julie, what do you think the effect of this will be? Because there's been a lot of parents complaining about this stuff going on in schools. Do you think this will, presumably this will give them, massive support? So go to the school, say, look what the government says.
I think this is massive, and I mean, certainly a lot of the groups that have been really lobbying against sort of transgender teaching and sex education in general are absolutely delighted with this announcement yesterday, and I think to me, I was really encouraged by it coming on the back of the other announcements, because one of my worries was that it's all very well stopping self-ID in adults, and it's all very well looking at the Tavistock, but actually children are already self-identifying in schools. If a child at the moment, if a child goes into school and says, you know, I'm a boy, but actually I want to be a girl, then that just gets accepted. And obviously, if they're being read books and things like that, which, you know, say that a girl can become a boy or a boy can become a girl, then they just believe it. So the fact that the government has clearly said that this ideology, you know, shouldn't be taught in schools is huge, and it means that parents, if that does happen, can go back to the school and say, look, this is not on. Whereas I think parents were probably afraid to do that before, because it was being promoted as this is what we do, you know, and some of the organisations that were going in and teaching that, you know, you can be born in the wrong body and that a girl can actually become a boy, etc., were being seen as the experts, when in fact they're not. And I think the government has been now reasonably clear about that. But obviously that doesn't stop individual schools doing things, and it doesn't stop individual teachers saying things. I've heard of a situation just today where a child was labelled transphobic for just saying that asking whether a person on a film was a boy or a girl, and the teacher accused them of being transphobic.
What?
Yeah. So
asking a question. Gosh.
If asking a question because I think it was a boy who was doing a makeup tutorial, and the child asked, is this a boy or a girl? And the teacher accused them of being transphobic. Gosh. When in fact what they could have said was, boys can do makeup, girls don't always like makeup.
Yes. Gosh.
So I think it is really good news. But as Carys said, I think we mustn't take our foot off the pedal. We must keep checking up what our children are being taught. We need to keep pushing. And pushing good material, of which there isn't an awful lot out there.
And well, I'd love to hear you on this. I've got a question here, but I want you to come and then talk about Lovewise. But MR Associates on YouTube is asking Tim, Carys, Julia, I'd like to hear your views on insight regarding the fact that Scotland is the first to become the first country in the world. Is that right? The first country in the world to teach LGBT inclusive curriculum in schools. Is that right?
I think I certainly have heard that. I think you should always try and push back, but to do that properly, you need a vision of what you think should and shouldn't be taught. It's not enough just to say no, otherwise the other side will come back with their apologetics. And, you know, Christians have apologetics, as you were talking about, otherwise their material is great. You know, teach about the fact that we're all created in the image of God, male and female. And that's the bottom line. It's very important. That's where everything started. And you have to, you know, structure, you know, you need to get together and look at structured curriculums for that, and look at how you structure sports and other lessons, science and biology, so that it reflects that reality, rather than running away from it or coming up with complete woo that's just a bunch of nonsense. How do you treat children, you know, on the playground, all sorts of things. So, or after school clubs, you know, I know they're probably less now with the lockdowns and things. So, yes, I think there's a slightly different battle in Scotland, but you can learn a lot from what's been happening elsewhere. I think Scotland has it particularly tough in some ways. I mean, the reason I say that, you had this pornography in school, actually, and the minister making excuses about that, which is disgrace. And also you've had the partly successful battle against a named person scheme, which was very serious.
Yes, true.
Were involved in that. That was the Christian Institute.
And now at the moment you've got the whole hate crime thing as well over there. They seem to be further down this agenda than we are, don't they, over there?
There's one other thing I would like to say with schools that nobody's mentioning at the moment. And Scotland is a good sort of laboratory, as it were, to look at this, which is the decline of belief in free speech among younger people. Everywhere you look, on opinion polls and surveys, the younger people are, the less likely they are to support free speech, and the more likely they are to support hate speech laws. And to say that people are saying men can't be women or women can't be men should be criminalised for saying that. And in Scotland, I think young adults are more likely to say that than not to. That's a problem that needs to be tackled in the curriculum, in RSC or PHSC or whatever you call it. It needs to be tackled in school assembly. It is not acceptable that people are thinking like that. They are going down the path of organized confusion, deceit, and lying. And you can't have a free society. You can't have a mature society that functions properly and reasonably and for the good of all. So that is a great...
Carys, you were talking about how we need alternative systems and a better message to teach. And then, but Julie, you work with Lovewise, which do great work in exactly this area, don't they? Maybe my colleagues can put link to Lovewise and our review of Lovewise material as well up on the chat. But tell us about Lovewise. I think you're doing great work, aren't you, in that?
Yeah, I work 1 day a week for Lovewise. So it's an organisation which was set up by Christian paediatricians and sets out to teach sex and relationships education from a Christian perspective. So some of our stuff is kind of more Christian than others, but we've recently produced a very new resource which is called Relationships Matter, which is for primary schools, and it's free, so schools can access it and online for free, and it covers what the RSE regulations, the new regulations, ask it to cover, but obviously from a Christian perspective. So it's really good material, and yeah,
would only Christian schools use it, or does some secular schools use it as well?
No, secular schools could use it as well. That material isn't particularly Christian. That material is just biological and looking at things like friendships and families and things like that, marriage. So yes, that's not particularly Christian. Some of the other resources are more Christian. There are also resources for parents and churches as well. But so I go into schools and teach. Depending on where I'm teaching, I can teach sometimes more Christian than others. So if I'm in a Catholic school, I can be quite overtly Christian. Church of England school less. And if I go into a non-faith school, then I would say that I was from a Christian organisation, but I wouldn't bring the Bible or particularly the fact that we're created by God.
When it comes to sex education, are you teaching wait till marriage? Is that what you teach in that?
We would be teaching the benefits of waiting till marriage. So we wouldn't be telling people you have to wait until you're married, obviously. We would be getting them, particularly if I'm talking to older children, so sort of 12, 13, 14-year-olds, getting them to just think about what might be the benefits of waiting till you get married, and what might be the downsides of not waiting, so that they think about it. So you're not being judgmental, but you're trying to get them to think about the obvious actually benefits of waiting till marriage, and just getting to think about what marriage is, what commitment means, what what love really means, what the vows of marriage mean, and that's what's really important.
And what's the take up like? I mean, how many schools use this material, do you know?
Not very many. So I mean, I have been into quite a few schools in my area. It is less easy, I think, to get into schools than it was. Although I think the more recent guidance that came out yesterday, I think helps. Hopefully then parents and schools will feel on a bit more firm ground, not to have to teach gender ideology, so that they can actually think about what boys actually are, what boys puberty is like, what girls are, what girls puberty is like. And also making sure that people see different viewpoints. Most children want to get married one day. They need to know what marriage is. It's not that you're lecturing them or saying they have to get married, or...
That's right. Is it most children still want to get married?
Yeah. If I ask a question, most of them will say they want to get married. So they need to understand what that means.
And just to round off then, because we're running out of time, but the topic of conversion therapy came up, and people often think this relates only to therapy for unwanted sexual attractions, but it does also relate to this whole transgender thing, doesn't it? And somebody's asking, is that, are they still planning to ban conversion therapy? I mean, maybe Carys, you'd like to talk about this and the impact of this whole thing.
Well, it's very interesting. Yes, the government does want to ban it for same-sex attraction. There was a letter published on Facebook by an LGBT campaign group the other day, actually, from Liz Truss to them. It was a group called Ban Conversion Therapy UK. And it was quite a lengthy, well-written letter. And it said they were still exploring legislative and non-legislative options. Now, it was saying what the government has been saying for the last 10 years. So we don't know if they're being fobbed off or what. Because, and the reason I say that is, when the Sunday Times back in June, I think, leaked, or the government leaked to the Sunday Times plans to stop these gender self-ID plans, it was also said, and this clearly came from the government, that they were going to pass a conversion therapy ban somehow to placate LGBT people. And at the time I looked into this, and I worked out that it was to placate Stonewall, which has a grip over the government, and the Government Equalities Office, which is really an LGBT department. It's not really about all protected characteristics. So that said, Liz Truss has previously rode back on the ban being about gender identity therapy. I can't remember now, but it is within the last 2 years, because she hasn't been a minister on this area for the last 2 years. And that is precisely because so many controversy around puberty blockers. And if you're not going to have physical treatments, well, children coming into the Tavistock, they are clearly troubled, all those children with the Tavistock or CAMS, and they need psychotherapy from professional therapists. So what needs to happen is a rowing back on the current professional ban. So I don't think there'll ever be a full ban in the UK, because we've got a professional ban anyway. The question is, that needs to be revisited and investigated thoroughly, because it's not been based on thorough open research or dialogue with therapists who've actually been working with the clients who have either gender confusion and it went against their conscience and wanted, or with unwanted same-sex attraction.
Mm-hmm. Listen, I think we're out of time, folks, but it's been a great discussion. Thank you so much. I want to thank Momesio, is that how you pronounce your name, who's just commented on YouTube. Thank you, Christian. I've donated to you and I'm an atheist. Well, that's great. We appreciate your support, and we'll pray for you as well in the mix of that. But we realize that many other people are involved and share our views from lots of different perspectives as well, particularly on these areas. So thank you. Thank you, Julie, for joining us on this. Really appreciate it, and your expertise and your work with Lovewise as well. It's been great to have you. And thank you to those joining us on YouTube and Facebook as well. Do like and share, and catch up with you again next Friday round the table. And then also we've got coming up a Gospel Issues seminar on October the 5th, Monday, 8 p.m, talking about the whole subject of education and schools. So do join us for that with Steve Bigu, our new head of education here as well. So thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, and see you again next week.
Thank you.